Hi, this is Anthony, parent of Iris Medic, and thanks for joining us today on this podcast. With me, I have our friends John Richardson of citizenshipsolutions.ca and Keith Redman of American Expatriates 2.0. You can find them on Facebook. We've been doing a lot of series on a lot of these complicated issues that involve taxation of people who become U.S. persons, and we teased a little topic last week about all these green card holder issues about expatriating, if you still have it, what are the tax consequences, what's a covered expatriate, what happens if your green card expired and you're living overseas, are you free and clear, what do you need to do, what about this 8 out of 15 years things in the expatriation tax? So we cannot cover it all at all, but we're going to try to hit on some of the bigger topics and really some things to think about. So John, what's the big problem that we have here?
Well, the big problem is that for people who get a permanent resident visa to live in the United States, which is referred to as being a green card, is that, the United States is a little bit like the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never really leave. And even those who know the rules in advance will often have trouble getting out of the United States without being subject to an asset confiscation, aka exit tax. But where I really see a great deal of this, the people who had no idea about these rules, left the United States years ago, and then something happens, they have some asset in the United States, whatever, and then they enter what I would call, it'd be great, Anthony, we should do a remake of the series, The Twilight Zone. I don't know if you remember that, but...
Are you kidding me? My favorite. Oh, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
And I got to say, yeah, maybe that's what attracted me to tax, too, because I am a fan of The Twilight Zone. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, this is the original series. Okay?
Oh, yeah, that's the only one. Rod Serling, he's a great writer. He's the only one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those green card holders who left the United States, this sort of thing, well, I don't live there. I don't have any interaction with the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code anymore. I guess I would say, welcome to the Twilight Zone.
Well, you know what, Keith was mentioning something, and I was like, you know what, let's get to the Twilight Zone. Like, let's get to the first episode of this season. Here's a Twilight Zone. Keith, you were mentioning something earlier about someone inheriting property. So run that hypothetical by us. About what if you are... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it happens quite often is that you are, and I'll just use France as an example. You're a French expat in the United States. You obtain a green card, and through the course of living in the United States with your green card, you inherit property from your family, whether that be just because you inherit the property, or let's say your parents pass away and you have, let's say, a home in France that's worth a certain amount of money. That's a big deal when it comes to wanting to leave the United States and, let's say, go back to France to live if you have a green card. Now, I don't know what the ramifications are, whether it's done if you leave, within that 8-year period or afterwards. That's where you guys can talk about that. But it's a hypothetical situation, but it's a very real situation that happens all the time.
And I would say you're absolutely right. With the property, too, is usually the large value item that someone will inherit. And sometimes there'll be a sibling or other people it goes with. But you are really talking about things that will blow someone's estate way out of the exemption. Some of these properties have been in families for years, and they're worth quite a bit. So that's something that now this is sort of the concern when I hear that, because now, John, if someone's in the U.S. on a green card, inherits a property from France that, let's just say they're interested in this, it's not unreasonable, $4 million. Now what just happened, John?
Well, what clearly has happened is that if they want to leave the United States and they're what's called a long-term resident, meaning that they've had a green card for 8 of the 15 years prior, they're definitely going to be a covered expatriate, meaning subject to the exit tax.
That's the point we want to, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but how does that affect that if you inherit the property along with your siblings? Does that make an added complication with it? Your siblings being in France, let's say, and you're the only one of your siblings with a green card.
They'll hate you, but other than that, they're not going to like that you're a U.S. person. But I don't see it changing too much, because you're just taking, you're attributing one part of the interest. You're not. That's really the only difference.
Okay.
You're only So I don't see
Got it.
that much. I don't know. Maybe John sees another issue popping up.
Well, I think I agree with you that you would just take the percentage interest that the green card holder has, but I've got to warn you, okay, that there is a group of compliance people who would perhaps interpret that to be an interest held in sort of joint tenancy. And believe it or not, they will then take the position that the green card holder would be deemed to own 100% of the asset.
Oh my God!
Hold on,
No.
I believe that is completely wrong. I believe it's completely
It
wrong.
is.
And we can do another podcast
Yeah.
on that. But you need to be very careful who you listen on.
Yeah, and I would, it's always, you know what, and I think it's okay. If you're getting a tax bill that seems way too extreme, it's okay to get a second opinion. It really is. A lot of times, I mean, when you get to these issues, if you've been listening, you see all the turns and twists along the way. And, I think it's the, job of, job people like John and I is to turn and twist until we get the best number for a client that we can kind of get. And if you get with a big number, roll the dice again, see what you can come up with again, because there's gotta be, rarely are you stuck with the worst possible number. Usually there's something you can do.
Yeah, I think for listeners here, the principle is simply this, that once the asset level, the net worth, rises above $2 million, that's a signal there may be problems on the horizon trying to leave, meaning they'd be subject to the exit tax rules, which could, depending on the circumstances, result in a very significant confiscation of their assets on the way out. But perhaps not, right? I mean, the exit tax rules are complicated. They operate very differently for different kinds of people.
But now, if somebody is not in the U.S. for all that long, has a green card, comes in and out, is it that big of a deal?
Well, the problem that we're talking about, to be very clear, okay, we're talking about the applicability right now of the exit tax regime, the 877A exit tax regime. That applies only to people who are long-term residents. And long-term resident in the Internal Revenue Code 877 is actually defined as having had the right to live in the United States for 8 out of the last 15 years. Now, that's what the test is. So if you do not meet the test of 8 out of the last 15 years, then that's good, and you probably should get out before you do. There are varying ways to not meet that test, though. Okay, one way is to simply not have spent enough time in the United States. In other words, by that I mean the time between entering the United States with a green card and checking out of the U.S. tax system, according to the rules in the Internal Revenue Code, is less than 8 years. That's the first way of doing it. A second way of doing it has to do with perhaps the use of residence tax treaty tie-break provisions that may be able to be used in certain circumstances, so that the years where you are subject to the tax treaty tiebreaker are not counted towards the 8 out of the 15. So that is worth exploring. But once you get into that, you also need to be careful, because there's conflicting rules on the effect of taking the tax treaty tiebreaker, right? I mean, if you file that form, does that mean it's an automatic expatriation or not? The Form 883 says it is. But if you look at IRS Notice 2009-85 or whatever it is, it says it's not. In that case, it says that you need to also file the 8854. So you're dealing with extraordinarily complicated rules, inconsistent interpretation of the rules. And, my view is you're probably better off just, after in year 7, while you're living in the United States, I think you should probably get out. Or never get the green card at all. There are other ways to be in the United States. There are other kinds of visas. But there's a reason that it's called a green card. Kryptonite, right? That's what it is.
That's right. Yeah. And it is getting, as we sort of, as you stalk into these issues, they kind of hard to keep track of. And John was mentioning this, that, this is basically just the U.S. taxation of green cards. This issue right here is easily a full year law school class, easily. You could fill up, I could fill up, but I think John would have no problem, creating a syllabus for this that would last 16 weeks of intense study about all the various issues that are going on. And there would
Yeah,
probably even be an advanced course, a few advanced courses involved too.
well, and even then, after studying it for 16 sessions, you'd have a theoretical understanding of it. But make no mistake, applying the theory to the reality of a lot of these situations is not easy at all.
That's actually true, because in a lot of the best law school classes, you have to do the theory part, then you have to do the practical part. This is the way the law should work. This is the way it actually works. And, that should work can be really dangerous. The should work, it's like, people should read words the way they mean. They should be consistent. The laws should be understand. Right? We have a taxpayer bill of rights that says a whole bunch of things, right? Like the law should be understandable, and it's just not. Not only if it's not understandable, they don't even tell you what it means when you ask them, because they don't know what it means. And that's sort of what we run into with this. And by the way, as we're talking right now, the tax code is only getting more and more complicated as we speak. I'm pretty sure they're debating, and there's going to be another passage of some sort of COVID tax relief bill that's underlying another layer of complexity to everything. So it's only increasing. Now, as I think the thing is as we get through these doomsdays, I guess it might be a little depressing to listen to us all the time. But here's the thing. This is the upshot. A lot of times there are solutions. It just takes some work. I mean, I'd say most of the times that there are solutions. It just takes some work. And now here's something you were mentioning earlier, John, because you were saying this. You know what? Actually, it might make sense for some people to pay the exit tax, to leave the U.S., pay the exit tax, as opposed to staying a U.S. person, because that will reduce their tax liability. Now, that sounds interesting to me, and it sounds like good news. And maybe our listeners need to hear some of that. So could you run through a hypothetical where, hey, look, because of these rules, this is where it may make sense to maybe expatriate as a U.S. person. You'll end up with a lower tax burden than if you just kept on to U.S. citizenship.
Yeah, sure. This is something that
green card in this case.
Yeah, this is something that you've spoken about before. I remember, Anthony, is the problem that once you're a U.S. tax resident, you're taxed on your worldwide income according to U.S. tax rules, and that includes taxation on capital gains. And capital gains are defined as the difference between the sale price and the purchase price. And let's imagine that you bought the property, or you inherited the property or something, 40 years ago, and you just immigrated to the United States, say 10 years ago, right? Now, if you were inside the United States and you sold that property, you would have to pay a capital gains tax based on the difference between the sale price and the acquisition cost or purchase price. What did I say? 40 years ago.
40 years ago. Yeah.
Now, if you expatriate, interestingly, if you're a covered expatriate, meaning you have over $2 million in assets plus some other things, it's a deemed disposition of assets. But what's quite interesting about it is that Section 877A has a step-up in base provision, which basically says that for green card holders, they are given the benefit of the fair market value at the point that they became a U.S. tax resident. So let's imagine that the capital gain over the 10-year period was maybe, say, $5 million, or something like that, significantly less. I mean, it actually could make sense for a green card holder to expatriate simply to take advantage of the lower capital gains payment, right?
Yeah, right, and it's not necessarily because the rate is lower. Actually, I don't think it is, but your base, your gain is just calculated as much lower, and this is one of the nastiest.
Right. Yeah, less is subjected to taxation. That's right.
And so this is one of the nastiest surprises, I think, of the U.S. tax system. That is, it's completely absurd that when you become a U.S. person, that your basis in the property is what it was the date you acquired it. But that could have been 60 years ago. And for some reason, and I mean, this is basically what's happened, is the IRS wants the gain on something that appreciated while you weren't subject to any U.S. taxation. But this rule actually sort of goes back in time and extends the IRS's jurisdiction. We have a worldwide jurisdiction, but now we also end up with this temporal jurisdiction that's sort of like, well, from the beginning of time, I guess since 1950, retroactive jurisdiction, which is really obnoxious. Now, I would say this is one of the things that we tell people all the time. Before you become a U.S. person, you've got to get some tax advice, because there is a fix to that to avoid it. Yeah. Many times, immigration attorneys, no one really likes to talk to tax lawyers, I think. I think that's what it is. Again, we
Yeah.
all I think we intimidate a lot of people, but we really are here to
But
help.
It's a must.
And it's a must because you know doing a sale and buyback of your assets the day you become a U.S. person. Now you have a new stepped up basis, and I'll take that. You know, I do have to get to something right now. There's somebody at my door. You guys take care of this right now. I'll leave you with a question. Let's see here. Someone's about to knock on my door, and my employee, you know, we're shut down here. Yeah.
I actually have a question I'd like to pose. So you're looking at it in this particular situation retroactively, but let's say you're in the United States, you're a green card holder, and you are planning on going back to your or original country, let's say France, and you know in the coming years you're going to inherit from your parents. So wouldn't it be best to rid yourself of the green card as soon as you get back to France before you inherit that property, so you bypass all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, of course it is, but I think we need to be clear on what it means to get rid of the green card because. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this exactly, or to put it more generally, how does a green card holder sever tax residency with the United States? And there's basically two ways of doing that. The first is, and this is not rocket science. You'll find this in Section 7701B6 of the Internal Revenue Code, where it says, this is a bit of a paraphrase, but you're considered to be a U.S. tax resident, meaning subject to worldwide taxation, until you sever the green card, abandon the green card, which is filing a form, basically, telling immigration that you're abandoning the green card and you no longer want it. And from that date on, you've severed tax residency with the United States. Right now, to be very, very clear, that's a different thing from the actual green card itself expiring. Okay, I mean, if you leave the United States and you don't file that form, technically, you still have that outstanding permanent resident visa there. And what the Internal Revenue Code says is that to sever tax residency, you actually need to hand that in. Okay, hand the green card in. There's a very simple process to do that. Now, the second way of doing that is through what's called the tax treaty tiebreak provision. And that's also in Section 7701B6 of the Internal Revenue Code. And what that says is that by taking advantage of a tax treaty tiebreaker provision in a tax treaty, and by the language says giving notice to the secretary, all right, you have to give notice to the secretary, and the IRS interprets that to mean filing the 8833 plus the 8854. Then you've also severed tax residency. But if you don't sever tax residency in one of those two ways, and if you just move out of the United States, you're still a U.S. tax resident, and you've exacerbated the problem, with the inheritance, right? Particularly if it's pushed you over the 2 million asset level, right? So, you really need to be careful. You need decent advice.
So feasibly, you could be your green card can expire where you're not allowed, quote unquote, back in the United States to live, but you can still be considered a U.S. tax resident. But you can't go back to the United States.
Absolutely, positively. I mean, the
incredible.
The permanent
this is the Twilight Zone, right?
The permanent this is important for people to understand. The permanent resident visa, from an immigration point of view, continues only as long as the person has the intention to live permanently in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So, for all practical purposes, let's say, I've had all kinds of people who I've worked with in this situation. Say you're, you were a professor or something. You taught in the United States for 10 years. Let's say you went back to the UK or something like that. Let's say that you just thought that by leaving the United States, that was it from a tax point of view. Well, as I just explained, you're still considered to be a U.S. tax resident, even though it's pretty clear you've lost the intention to live permanently in the United States and you have no immigration status. So absolutely, positively, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out there who are considered full-time U.S. tax residents, but who have no right to live in the United States.
That is
So
absolutely right. Yeah, and Keith, I
it's
believe I
incredible.
read, and now I think the total amount of green cards issued, expired, whatever, it's a pretty large number.
It is. And one time I had the figure. I
I
don't
thought it
have
was
it.
like 10 million, something big like that.
Okay, I know it's in the millions. I do
Yeah,
know
it's a big number, and
yeah.
now here's a
So
hypothetical a couple of hypotheticals I'd like to run by, and here's one that I think sets the situation pretty well because this happens all the time. Let's say that you are a supermodel, and you're not
a what?
you're not
A
you're a
supermodel?
supermodel. It's not too hard for you
Okay.
guys. So let's pretend you're a couple years ago when you guys were back doing supermodel things, and pretend you were born in a different country, and hey, look, the work is in New York, right? The work is in New York. To get the big bucks, you get New York. Okay, you get a visa. Okay, you got a green card now. And let's assume this. Let's make some assumptions that you've been very successful. You now have an apartment in Manhattan that's probably worth about $5 million. And each year you make pretty decent amount, somewhere between $800,000 and $2 million each year. You're on year 7 of your residency in the U.S. What are some of the things you should be thinking about?
Getting out.
Yeah.
Well, first off, I think it's at a point where you have to think, am I going to spend the rest of my life in the United States or not? That's a very basic first question.
That's where I think you got to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, what John just said, if you're not going to live in the United States for the rest of your life, you need to get out.
Yes. Yeah. Because you can, or come up with some great plan, something else. Because there are other ways to deal with it, but you got to come up with some great plan. I think that year 7, that's where you got to make up your mind. Is this, are you settling down in the country? Because you can, and you might change your mind. That's okay. It's just going to cost you. So try to figure that out by year 7, I'd say. Then you could just sort of avoid the whole, this exit tax issue that we're talking about. This whole thing, you could avoid it. Now, but as we said, maybe you do want to wait to year 8, though. Maybe you do want to be subject to the exit. Either could be a situation as we described where you wanted to go. Now, let's say that. Here's the common situation.
Anthony, you would not wait till year 8. You would still get out, okay? Because remember,
you're right. Yeah,
there's been no realization of it whatsoever. Yeah. But let me just make an important point for listeners here, okay? We're talking as though the people we're talking about are the people who have green cards, the permanent resident visas. The way to go to the United States is to find a visa, find a way to achieve what you want in the United States without getting the green card. Okay?
Yeah.
There are all kinds of visas out there. And, the chances are, I think, very, very good that you can achieve what you want without getting into this permanent residence problem. That's what is essentially the root of all evil. And let me give you a topical example, okay, of one we've seen a lot in the last year. It's Prince Harry, right? Okay, and Meghan Markle. So as I understand, and my understanding is limited to what I read in the papers, but what I read in the papers is that they have moved to Los Angeles. Which is, of course, in the United States. Now, I don't know what Prince Harry's legal status is in the United States. I have no idea. But it would seem to me that, first of all, it's very important that he doesn't get a green card, okay, because that triggers worldwide taxation. But then also, as you know, Anthony, we have the substantial presence test, right, which could also make him a U.S. tax resident. Yep. Now, here's the difference, though, okay? Here's the difference. If he meets the substantial presence test, okay, he is subject to worldwide taxation, but he's not subject to the exit tax if he leaves. Because remember, okay, with me? Right. Harry needs to give one of us a call for sure here.
I think so.
I had a discussion about this.
My mother thinks I'm a prince, so I'm going to give the tiebreaker to me, John. I think you should give me a call.
You have absolutely. There you go. I wouldn't want the liability on this one, okay, I can tell you. But, I was speaking with Laura Saunders of the Wall Street Journal about this a while ago. And what I had said to her, and I will say this again, is that, Harry does not want to be a U.S. tax resident, whether by green card holder or substantial presence test. And the best thing would be to keep an ankle bracelet on Harry to see how much time he spends in the United States.
Yeah.
It really monitors that.
As he gets close, keep him out of that. But seriously, okay, all of these problems will never materialize if somebody doesn't get a green card. Green card.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, Prince Harry would have a really bad problem if he did get a green card in 8 years. Oh, I kind of want to leave. It's like, well, you should have done some planning ahead. So we're going to assume that he had it, and that's a big distinction. A visa, because I mean, well, and let's just say that here, I just give you facts on a supermodel, okay, who's making enough money in the U.S., doing great. So year 7, do you really want to have a green card? Now, here's something I just thought of. It's like, well, this person has a decent amount of money. Well, what's to stop them from getting an EB-5 visa? You need $500,000. And as long as you're not a Chinese person, which there's a cap of $10,000 per year, I think, on that, you could probably get an EB-5 investor or something else. And I think that's the point. What are you really looking to do? And there's other visas available, if you are, someone in the arts, if you are someone special like that, there's visas for that. That green card is really maybe overkill. That sounds what it's.
And that's important to note, because there are particular categories where the person is offered a green card in an expedited fashion. For example, if you are a French coiffeur and you have studied at one of the big French haircutting schools, I'll put it, you can get a green card quite easily. Or if you happen to be a French chef, you can get a green card straight away. And these individuals don't realize, one, there may be another option for them, because once they hear green card, they think fantastic. And they end up getting into a situation that's tough for them in a few years when they want to go back to France, for example.
Right. You could see that here's someone who's at the top of their game, going to the best schools, totally amped up about the future, doing their thing, like, yep, and I'm going to go to the U.S., I'm going to make a name for myself, I'm going to bust my butt for the next 10 years. They go bust their butt for the next 10 years. They end up with this empire, and you shouldn't have been you should have done something different, they find out. And all of that, because they didn't know that the green card. Yeah, so we really want to be careful about getting those green cards. Really think about it. Is that what your intention is? Do you really want to be subject to the U.S. exit tax at some point?
It's even worse than that, right? Because many of these people will stay in the United States. They're happy to continue living in the United States. I mean, they don't anticipate leaving, but understand, okay, that by becoming a U.S. tax resident, they're subject to U.S. worldwide taxation. And we're talking about people who may very well have assets wherever they're coming from, right? And this can be a very, very bad problem, which is why a good deal of pre-immigration planning is necessary. But the best type of thing, and I think that this should be a specialty for immigration lawyers. I mean, in the past I've seen them specialize in green cards. I think they should specialize in non-green cards. I think that's probably much more important.
And absolutely. And John, you had said something that would be good. They do pre-immigration tax planning as it pertains to the U.S. tax system.
I wish that's something we could actually market somehow. And that's sort of I've been trying, and just because there's so much value to deliver, a little bit of work goes a long way. And it's just a very difficult thing people need to understand. Look, an immigration lawyer really looks at their silo of immigration law. They really do. And I dealt with the of them. They really just want to focus on the immigration aspect. They don't even want to think about the tax stuff. They got into immigration law because they like immigration law. Most attorneys, okay, this is the thing you need to understand. Most attorneys can't stand tax. The largest population of professionals I represent isn't doctors, it's lawyers. Okay, lawyers get themselves into trouble with taxes all the time. In law school, they forced us to take income tax. No one wanted to do it. And so attorneys naturally steer away from taxes. Judges steer away from it. They don't want to know what it is. So it's just this huge area. However, guess who cares about taxes? The IRS does, and they're there. So it's up to you to say, you know what, maybe I need to make sure I assemble a team. Here's my immigration guy. And if he's uncomfortable talking to a tax guy, I got to get a different immigration guy. That's basically it at that point, because these things are way too much. And that immigration aspect could be the simple part too. It's just like, well, you're just getting this. It's not a big deal. So you always could find someone else for that. I think finding a tax professional who understands immigration issues is a lot harder to find than just an immigration. It's some guy who can get your green card. Tons of people could do that. Someone who understands the whole big picture of what you're trying to accomplish, that gets a little bit harder, I would say.
Yeah. Now I have
go ahead, Keith.
one last hypothetical, if I may, because this has come up quite a bit. Is let's say you are a green card holder, you've left the United States. I just use France as an example. It could be any country. You left to the United States to go back to France, and you've been in France for 20 years, and all of a sudden you find out, I guess I never formally gave up my green card, so I am actually a U.S. tax person. What does that individual do at that moment, considering they have left the United States with that green card 20 plus years ago? That happens a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, and a common thing that people do is they'll just ignore it and hope it goes away. And, for something from ancient history, who knows? Maybe it will go away. The issue becomes a little more difficult, when you have to confront the issue is when there's a reason to return to the U.S. or there's some property in the U.S. that you got to get this taken care of. And that's what it comes down to. I think that we've talked about this a lot, how difficult it is for the IRS to actually enforce its tax code. It really can't. And I would say how many people, the IRS is down to, I think, 80,000 people. You have 80,000 people managing the world's most complicated law ever. That's 80,000 people total. And I think just to give it in perspective, there's about 90,000 New York police officers. So you have 90,000 cops in New York managing all of that. You have a smaller amount managing the most complicated, with the numbers like you wouldn't believe, handling this as the tax code gets more and more complicated every moment that we speak. Something has to give. And what gives is fairness, because the IRS has to act arbitrarily. They can't get to everything. And so this is where we have to say, it's like, well, I can't sit here and tell you with a straight face that if you do the wrong thing, all hell is going to break loose. I can't tell you that. People have done the wrong thing with the IRS and gotten away with it. It just comes up to you to say, okay, and this is what John and I talk about. However, sometimes doing all that someone tells you to do isn't really what you should do, and actually opens up a whole lot more exposure where now it never ends. And that's sometimes we see that extreme go too, where someone's like, okay, I'm not in compliance. I'm not in compliance. Oh, you know what we need you to do? We need to go to this nuclear option where we do this whole voluntary disclosure program, and we're going to tell them everything. We're going to go over this. That might be a bad idea, because you're really opening up a 5-year process, to be honest. And it really might not be the right thing to do. And I would say there too, if someone's giving you, where I said, if you get a tax bill that doesn't make sense, no, it's okay to get a second opinion. And if also someone's telling you something kind of like, whoa, this seems a little crazy, I got to do, just for making this little mistake, I got to do all that. It's okay to get a second opinion there too. Because there's also little fixes, there's little tricks here and there that we run into that save people all the time. John, do you have any more? Yeah, go ahead, John.
I'd like to take a stab at that, because this is something I've seen, to put it mildly, a lot of. This is absolutely not one size fits all. Okay, there are differing ways of attacking this problem, and I think largely it depends on the reason for attacking it. Now, one reason for the awareness or attacking it could be because of some kind of FATCA inquiry. I've seen this sort of thing where all of a sudden people are, being asked to certify whether they're a U.S. person or not, and then, they realize the extent of the problem. That's one, sort of issue. And dealing with the banks is a different kind of issue. It may very well be possible, reasonable, and practical to write a self-certification, provided it's done properly, not being a U.S. person. And then the basis for that could be, I'm speaking in generalities, and this is certainly not advice to any specific person. It could be using the tax treaty tiebreakers, right? Because don't forget that a treaty basically is an agreement between the United States and another country that, really is going to override the Internal Revenue Code on this type of issue. So it may well be that a lot of these people can take the position that although they may be a U.S. tax resident according to the Internal Revenue Code, the treaty may mean that they're not a U.S. tax resident. Okay, maybe. Okay, I'm not saying this for all people, etc. So that's what needs to be explored. Now, when we move over to the tax situation, you need to begin with exactly what is their situation. Are they somebody who just hasn't been in compliance, but there's no big deal particularly? Would they be a covered expatriate? So in some cases, one way of dealing with this, and I think it can be reasonable depending, would be to use the streamline, go back, do 5 years of filing, and if you've then satisfied the 5-year compliance thing, if your net worth is below $2 million, then you presumably would be able to hand in the green card and not be a covered expatriate. Okay, that's one possibility for people with a lot of money. Another way of viewing this is taking the position they've not been a U.S. tax resident since they left the United States. That can be a little bit more complicated, but in my experience, there are ways of dealing with this problem that can generally lead to a soft landing. But a soft landing is still a landing, meaning you're going to feel the bump. But what you absolutely should not do is this. You walk into somebody's office and they say, "Oh my God, you are a U.S. tax resident. You never handed in that green card, et cetera, et cetera. And what I need to tell you is the 20 years you've been out of the United States, you should have filed U.S. tax returns, and you were subject to all these penalties for not having filed information. And now that your net worth, because you own an apartment in Paris, is over $2 million, if you try to hand that in right now, you're going to be subject to the exit tax rules, and they're going to take your assets on that level too. So there's no hope for you. Your life is over. Go kill yourself or whatever." Okay?
John, I think they're also going to add in the IRS is going to come and arrest them too. Usually with that.
That's right.
They're going to add that in too. And you're going. That's right.
Yeah.
You better do this, otherwise, they're going to come and get you.
When you read that or hear that, without getting into your facts, you're definitely dealing with the wrong kind of advisor. In fact, you're dealing with the worst kind of advisor.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, look, I'm not passing this off as advice for any one person, but these issues are complicated. They're highly fact dependent, what your assets are, what it would mean to file 5 years of returns. I think it's entirely possible to get through this, satisfying both the tax and the immigration laws. Or if you can't, then, perhaps see, how the treaties might help you. But what you do not do is what I just described a moment ago. Yep, it's complex. Yep, it's awful. Yep, you're never going to be able to nope, you're never going to be able to understand it. But just find somebody who does, okay, and can guide you kind of step by step.
There are, that we hear
Good
a lot
point.
of things. We John and Keith, well, all of us hear just some real nightmares of, because you get into some areas of law, and I'll say this. As someone who went to law school, and before I got into tax in 2006, I did a lot of criminal appeals. I did a lot of civil litigation. I did a lot of appeals. And I would say that nothing I did before tax compares in the complexity. Nothing at all. That there's so many moving pieces that will impact something you're not thinking about. And this is why it's just probably the greatest challenge, as a lawyer. It is probably one of the greatest challenges out there, strictly from that technical aspect. In other areas of laws, what the issues are more straightforward, and you're really just, in personal injury, you're just trying to prove negligence. That's really all it is. Does a person have something to sue? Okay, we don't care. We need damages. Okay, and there's a negligence. That's all it is. There's really not much to it. But, with this, it's just, so many, and then you're getting into different areas of law. You're getting into international law. You're getting into state law. So from an aspect, if someone's looking for a legal challenge, it's the best. If you're a client looking for help, you got to find the person who does get a kind of a thrill out of it, because it's just the most advanced level. It's the most intense sort of law around. Really is. I can't think of anything crazier myself that somewhat does exceed the absurdity of the Twilight Zone. With that. John, I think we want to tease our next one. We're thinking we got a next topic coming up. Our friend Monty Silver got his guilty regulations through global intangible low tax on whatever that is, tax income. And he's got some great regulations and really great news for clients.
Yeah.
A lot of the clients that we have, a lot of the clients on your board, Keith. I mean, the number one thing, guilty's killing the small guy. Well, I think there's a fix there, so we want to get into that. And Keith, do you think you get Monty on? Maybe we can have him on.
I'm going to try. I will reach out to him because he's done such a good job.
Yeah.
It would be great to have him on. So we will see what we can do for the next one.
Yeah. So there we go. So I just want to thank John. Thank you so much for joining us, Keith. Again, check out John at citizenshipsolutions.ca. Really one of the finest immigration tax attorneys combinations in the world. And Keith is just so helpful. And I mean, he's been helping out people left and right. Really, really one of the greatest guys around. Again, want to thank you guys for listening, and be sure to subscribe. And we look for some more content. We got some interesting things coming up, so be sure to subscribe.